and Ramon is present. And unfortunately, for all those who do, follow us and listen to us, we have to talk about sports this evening. So I couldn't be more
Sports ball,
bothered.
Ramon, sports ball.
Sports ball. So that is where the cricketer hits the ball over the net for a 5-pointer or something.
At least he's called a cricketer. Yes. And our cricketer is doing particularly poorly at the moment over in England. Those of us who care a little bit about that kind of stuff, I know that's not you, obviously, but
Nope.
those of us who care are quite deeply disappointed. And of course, scandal starts to come out because our sports cannot be without interference. So AB de Villiers came out this week and said, no, well, he wanted back in the team. And the team decided, they wouldn't take the best batsman in the world back into the team because, well, he hadn't been around for about a year. So, such is. Some people think that's a good call. Some people think it's a poor one. But, yeah, we're not doing very well. And we will probably be out of the World Cup, I reckon, by middle of this week. West Indies to play and a couple of other teams after Afghanistan. Maybe we'll get walked over by Afghanistan and that'll be really that. I think we can just quit sport then.
But isn't the solution really just to score the more goals in the opposition? I mean, how hard can that be?
Yeah, you would think, but what you've got to do in the South African protest team first is take a beer out of the fridge that they keep in the change room, and then once you've had a beer, you have a bit of a chat with the guys. You thank God for being at the tournament, and then you go out and you kind of swing the bat and hope for the best with your coach who knows nothing about batting and all about bowling, and apparently nothing about bowling. But so now that's enough boring for you, Ramon.
So there's hope for me to be the coach of the cricket team.
There is. I actually think you would be a good hire because at least you would be telling the guys to go out and win. But do you want to get on to our guest for the week since this is all about the sports ball?
Indeed. So I guess this week is Graeme Joffe, a sports journalist who is living in America of all places. I mean, I don't know if it's before or after Trump. That may, lead to some unsavory conclusions. But Graeme, welcome to the Renegade Report.
Gents, thanks very much for having me on the show.
I mean, the pleasure's all ours. So, I mean, I remember a while ago that you were considered one of the best sports journalist in this country. You were on 94.7 and you were on various radio shows and television shows. And then there was a bit of a story where you sort of left in a hurry to the USA. Can you explain why and what were the underlying reasons for that?
Ramon, thanks. Yeah, I mean, my career has been interesting. From I was a CNN international sports anchor from 1992 to 1999 in Atlanta. Then I came back to South Africa in 2000. And I wanted to come back because once you have South Africa in your blood, it stays in your blood. I always wanted to come back home, wanted to obviously share my experiences. CNN had pretty much set me up for life. And I knew that I wanted to come back and talk about the Proteas, talk about the Springboks, talk about Bafana. For me, talking about the Atlanta Braves winning baseball matches and the Chicago Bulls winning, it's not the same when it's in your heart. You're South African. And I came back in 2000, worked for Supersport a little bit in 2000, 2001. Then I did some work with 94.7 on The Breakfast Show with Jeremy Mansfield. And then it was about 2011 that I went out on my own and became a freelance sports journalist. And just totally by default, I got involved in investigative sports journalism. And as you know, in South Africa, there's almost no culture of investigative sports journalism. Yes, there's investigative journalism for news, but when it comes to sport, there's just a huge black hole. And that's allowed corruption in South African sport to manifest itself with a lot of these people not being exposed, and South African sport has been captured. The Olympic Committee of South Africa was one of my biggest targets. They then sued me for defamation in my personal capacity for 21 million, just to bully me, silence me, and cripple me financially. And it pretty much worked. Basically, no one, when it comes to a whistleblower, everyone runs 100 miles away. But I had to report what was really happening in South African sport. I had athletes, coaches, and administrators confiding in me, and I just needed to get it out there. I started to name and shame officials. Then things became pretty heavy. I started getting followed. My emails were hacked. My phone was illegally tapped. And there's a whole lot of stuff that happened in between. And hence, when I finally got down to writing my book just a couple of months ago, published it a couple of months ago, and it's all in there. Sport, greed, and betrayal will tell you everything that's happening in South African sport. And it's not what people want to hear and see, but it's time that South African sport, it's exposed what these administrators are doing to South African sport. And it's all about greed, corruption, nepotism, and maladministration. And when finally I had a private investigator helping me, that's when I got the news that things were going to get serious for me. I'd moved back from Johannesburg. I'd moved to Grahamstown to get out of the limelight. And I got a call one Friday night just telling me to get out of my apartment. They're coming to get me. And that's another whole story, which we can go into at some point as well, because I now believe that I was double crossed by the private investigator. And there are a few people that would have had a hand in getting me chased out of the country.
Sure, Graeme. I mean, it sounds almost like the stuff of movies. What do you say? I mean, most of us watch sport on television and all the other avenues now available to us. The average person sees sports as, their sports hero on television playing their sport, either winning or losing the game. That's excitement or disappointment. And there's not much consideration that there's this sort of seedy underworld and this underbelly. So when you sort of start saying these things and start sort of being like, oh, well, people are going to kill me over sport, it sounds like it's something out of a novel rather than out of real life. Give us a little bit of insight into why there is this seedy underbelly.
If we go back, if you look at the whole Hansik saga, no one could believe that either. I knew Hansi well. I had a lot of admiration for him. He was respectful to the media. He was actually a great guy. And so there again, you go, wow, that's not possible that Hansik would be involved in match fixing. So sport is the one thing that unifies South Africa. And it's one place where we don't want to believe it's corrupt. And unfortunately, because you don't have a culture of investigative sports journalism, it's allowed to manifest itself. And the Guptas have had a hand in it, but from top to bottom, from the sports ministry, under Fikile Mbalula, South African sport probably became the most corrupt entity that it's ever been. And it all filters down from there. And you've got all these conflicts. You've got marketing companies, you've got auditing companies, you've got media. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a bowl of just total corruptness. And people get greedy. The more they steal, the more they want, and it keeps on going. And the only ones that are suffering at the end of the day are the real good people, your coaches, your good administrators, and then obviously, most importantly, your sportsmen and women who now are just not getting the funds that they deserve. And very often now what's happening is South African athletes are having to pay their own way to represent your country. And how can that be fair? Because what that's doing then is making sure that South African teams are picked on wealth and not merit. So gone is transformation, gone is grassroots development, and these officials are just lying back and stealing the millions. A story that came out today, just before, about the Craven Week. A Craven Week, a kid at high school has to pay 7,000 or 8,000 rand to represent his province to go to Craven Week. It's unbelievable. SA Rugby is one of the wealthiest federations. Why doesn't Yuri Roo take a cut in his salary? Why doesn't Mark Alexander sponsor the tournament with all the ill-gotten gains that he's got from kickbacks? Kickbacks with Sedgers. Sedgers are like the Guptas of South African sport. They're a clothing supplying company, but now what have they got into? They're into roads and transport with government. They've involved with Ace Magashule. They're involved. It's unbelievable what these guys have got away with, but it's a big circle that have got no accountability because they're very well protected. And from Fikile Mbalula all the way down when he was sports minister, and then you've got all the layers underneath him. And I could name and shame 25, 30 people now that are some of the most corrupt people in South African sport, but they're not being exposed. And no one really wants to dig. Why? The good question that is why. And what's happened now in South Africa, because a lot of the media companies can't really afford to send their journalists away on these tours. The tours are long. Olympic Games, whether it be 3 weeks, cricket tours are 6 weeks, Soccer World Cup. It's very expensive to send your journalists. What's happening is some of the sporting federations are handpicking certain journalists to go to these games. So why would you bite the hand that feeds you? SASCOG sent a strong message to any journalist that wants to dig. If you want to dig into us, we're going to sue you. Graeme Joffe got sued for 21 million. Everyone kind of ran for cover. To this day, there are very few sports journalists in this country that actually want to give me any credit or even want to try and support me. But it will blow up eventually. And at the end of the day, they're actually doing, the journalists, by not reporting it and not exposing the truth, are doing more harm to South African sport in the long run. It's the same as a cancer. If you don't treat it, it's just going to keep on getting worse. South African sport, sadly, is getting more and more corrupt.
So, Graham, just remind us, Fikile Mbalula was Minister of Sport from, was it 2009, if I'm not mistaken?
I think 2000. I can't remember the exact dates. He was Minister of Police. Then he became Minister of Sport. Then he obviously got sidelined. Now he's back as Minister of Transport, which is quite
Right.
ironic. But he's been involved with Sedgars. Sedgars have paid for his Dubai vacations. He is one of the most corrupt people around. How he has not been caught out? His wife got caught out in this housing contract. But why does it all go silent? And where the biggest corruption actually is in South African sport is the national lottery. And that, for me, I just cannot believe that no one wants to pick up on these stories. The amount of false applications and people lining their own back pockets from national lottery funding is pretty scary. And I can explain to you how that all works.
Right. Well, okay. Let's go down. Let's magnify the issues a little bit more. So, when Sascock wanted to sue you for 21 million rand, what were the exact reasons for that defamation? What did you write or what did you say that made them wish to take this action on you?
I guess it was probably what I didn't say because I had a lot to say. At the time, I was writing columns for News 24 and for the Citizen newspaper, and they sued me in my personal capacity. Obviously, they're not going to sue News 24. Most of my columns were on News 24, Media 24, which is Naspers owned. So Sascock are not going to sue Naspers. I mean, and Naspers are their friends, which I can establish and substantiate with a whole bunch of stuff. So they sued me really to bully me, silence me, scare other journalists, and try to cripple me financially. And it actually made me more aggressive. But what they probably didn't know is that I actually had a personal indemnity insurance. So I actually had coverage. I had insurance coverage for defamation. And Hollard basically was my coverage. The worst part about that is Hollard then take over the case and they forget about you as the client. And the case hung over my head for 4 years. Editors said I'd been discredited. No one wanted to believe what I was telling them. Basically,
What
they
was the
said,
case, though? Sorry, Graham, but what did
oh,
you
sure.
say specifically?
Oh, no, just that. I mean, in about 25, 30 hard-hitting columns, how corrupt they are. They're being run by a mafia. There's nepotism. There's total corruption. There's sexual harassment. You name it, it's happening at the Olympic Committee of South Africa, and nothing's changed. A lot of it came out in that commission of inquiry, which happened a year ago, and I called it, what a waste of time and money. Nothing's changed. You still got some of the same big bully boys, even though the CEO and CFO were basically fired from the Olympic Committee of South Africa. Nothing's really changed. It's unbelievable what actually is happening. And again, it's from the rot starts from the top and goes all the way down.
All right, so Sascock. I mean, Sascock is an interesting one in itself because I mean you talk about the exploratory committee, but as far as I understood that organization, for years we've had problems where they would not send certain teams to the Olympics, which actually had medal prospects, or who had done everything that was required of them. I'm thinking of the men's hockey team, and I think the women's hockey team on at least one occasion, if I'm not mistaken. Those particular teams which were prevented from going, some swimmers, and a few other sports people who weren't allowed to go to the Olympics, even though they had qualified or worked really, really hard and done what was required. And in any other country, would probably have been, congratulated and been sent on their way to the games. There was that, and then that coincided with the administrators, going on these lavish sort of holidays, essentially. I'd always found it funny that I think the CEO, if I'm not mistaken, was a man with a very large BMI, who looked like he wouldn't have been able to throw a tennis ball more than 3 meters. I always found that quite humorous of the Olympic Committee of our country. I mean, maybe he's a great administrator. Turns out he wasn't, I think. But certainly very obviously clashing ideals between the management and what sports people really wanted out of it. And I don't know where you stand on this, but it seems as if a lot of our sports people have succeeded in spite of the administrators. I'm thinking of our athletics. at the moment, which is particularly good. We've got world-class runners in 200 and 400 and even 100 meters. We've got long jumpers. We've got people doing really well, and that seems to be completely in spite of swimming as well, as for years been in spite of the management. What's your take on where SASCOC has kind of ended up and the arc that's been taken?
And you're 100% correct. So South Africa has incredible talent. But think about this. For what South Africa has in talent, finance, and facilities and resources, we should be getting 30 medals at the Olympic Games. We get 6 or 7 medals, and they come back and we celebrate it like we've won the World Cup. And that's administration trying to pat themselves on the back, trying to make a big thing. I mean, yes, an Olympic medal is absolutely everything, and you're competing against the world. It's an incredible, it's probably the greatest, it is the greatest achievement any athlete could possibly want, to medal at the Olympic Games. But I've been to the Atlanta Olympic Games, I went to the Sydney Olympic Games, and I watch how these administrators operate. They bring their friends, they bring their families, they fly first class, they do everything for themselves. So the athlete comes second, and hence why you've had the shortage of funds. They always cry poverty, and they get millions and millions. SASCOG is if not the biggest beneficiary from the national lottery, but they always cry poverty. And that's what's happening. So they don't want to send these athletes, like that whole men's hockey fiasco. That was all Sam Ramsamy. Sam Ramsamy is one of the biggest poisons in South African sport, and has been for a long time. And he sits on the International Olympic Committee. So anything that I used to write to the International Olympic Committee telling them things, and basically to be squashed, because Sam Ramsamy is big friends with the IOC president, Thomas Bach. So nothing gets past the goalkeeper with Sam Ramsamy, and he is one of the real instigators. And even a current top official within SASCOG, confidently said to me, Graeme, that's the reason why SASCOG's in such a mess. Well, clean it up, guys. Clean it up. Take it upon yourself. But the federations are all loyal to SASCOG because they get promised lottery funding if they vote for certain officials. The whole system is totally corrupt. And you don't have you have so many good administrators, but to be honest, the majority of them now are feeding themselves. These smaller federations where people are paying their mortgages, they're running these offices, the national federations running from their homes, paying their mortgages through the federation, fixing their cars with federation money, spending money on their kids and their family with federation money. All the auditing is done by different people, and even the big names in auditors, KPMG and Deloitte, I mentioned it in my book. They've covered the dirty tracks of so many of these people, including SASCOG. I mean, Deloitte have been SASCOG's auditors for I don't know how long, until they finally packed it in about a year ago. I never got answers from any of these guys. I used to catch them out in lie after lie after lie, and they all just took the Fifth Amendment. So as a journalist, I could never get answers out of them, and they knew that I was a real threat to them, and that I was exposing more and more dirt, naming and shaming, and not scared to do it, fighting for the athletes who are silenced by draconian codes of conduct.
So, Graeme, so it is corruption and maladministration, and that's sort of a South African illness, I'm afraid to say. Where does transformation come in? So there's a lot of stories about quotas and being, demographically representative. All sports teams need to be that. For me personally, transformation in other aspects is used to cover up inefficiencies and to cover up a lot of maladministration. And I'm sure in sports it must be the same thing.
Ramon, I agree with you 150%. So you know what quotas are a result of? Quotas are a result of lazy administration and no grassroots development. If you had proper grassroots development, you put money into the townships, into the underprivileged areas, you put facilities, you have manned facilities. So you know what the Sports Trust does? They go in there and they put these multi-purpose courts down, but no one administers them. No one runs programs. No one looks after the facilities. So you go to Port Elizabeth, for instance, you see all these basketball courts. You know what they are now? They're drug havens. There's kids sitting around basketball courts with weeds growing through all the basketball courts. And basically kids are just sitting around there smoking dope. It's changed to, it's not administered, and it takes good administration. I traveled right throughout Africa. I did a documentary series called African Sporting Heroes. And I'll never forget the day I went to Nairobi to watch the Kenyan Olympic athletic trials. And for a whole day, from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m., there must have been 50 athletic coaches and administrators watching 1,000 kids go around all day long. And that's talent identification. Can you imagine our athletics administrators, the fat cats, finally going into a township and sitting in Diepsloot all day at an athletics track and watching these kids, giving them sandwiches for lunch, making them feel important and talent identification. And then you put them into academies. That's how the system should really work. The money's available, but it's not going to happen because the administrators are feeding themselves first before they even worry about the athletes. That's the travesty of the whole thing. The resources are available from Treasury, from National Lottery, from sponsors. Millions and millions is being plowed into South African sport, but it's finding its way into officials' back pockets.
You talk about all of these things, and I'm sure people are listening, and they might be going, okay, but surely if all of this stuff is happening and it's this corrupt and even the auditors are in on it, do you have a paper trail? Is there evidence for this, and why is it being ignored?
Jonathan, I've got my book is pretty much the paper trail. I've got my book's pretty much a textbook, and it's not easy to read because it's heavy, but I wanted to get everything out there. So yes, I've got a lot more information. And since the book's come out, I could write another book tomorrow now. The amount of information that's come out on the dirt. And why it is because you have a conflicted media. First of all, I told you about the sports media. A lot of these journalists are traveling, are going to overseas trips. They wined and dined by the federations. And I talk about, are we journalists before we fans? Are we fans before we journalists? A lot of the sports journalists in South Africa are fans before they're journalists. They're big mates with Yuri Roo of SA Rugby. They're big mates with Ivan Kors of the PSL. No one wants to really take that leap of faith and really expose it. And I stand to be, let me just say that's a big marginal, a big not an exaggeration, but there are a few sports journalists there like Robert Marawa, Neil Collins. There are a few guys willing to take that step. And look what's happened to them. Neil Collins is basically out in the wilderness. Robert Marawa got let go from Supersport. He's the best sports presenter in the country. He stood up for sexual harassment in the workplace. He's been a big supporter of mine, retweeting a lot of the sports corruption. He's the only sports journalist that's really had me on his show. And then he gets let go from Supersport and they cover up for it, saying, no, his contract had just come to an end. It's all BS and cover-ups. And the sad reality of it, at Supersport, you got some of the more corrupt players in South African sport, including a guy called Imtiaz Patel, who's one of the big boys at MultiChoice.
Right, and that segues nicely. Sorry, Jonathan. That segues nicely because when we talk about state capture and sports capture in this case, people think that it's public institutions with public funds. But in South Africa, we have quite a very top-heavy society. We've got a governing party that gains an overwhelming majority at elections, that has immense power, immense money. And if you want to make it big in South Africa, you basically have to coddle up to the ANC in some ways. So you have a lot of these big companies who make agreements with the government, essentially, to become these monopolies. And in sports, you have MultiChoice and obviously Supersport. Now, to me, I don't care about Supersport or sport, but to me, Supersport has always had a very, very good reputation for being one of the best sports broadcasters in the world, just in terms of quality, in terms of, maybe not the panels, to discuss rugby, but in terms of quality, in terms of the amount of rights they have, in terms of the amount of sports they present, they've always been seen as really world class in terms of that. But obviously, that must come at a cost of sorts, and that cost is schmoozing up to the government.
Yeah, and that's where and I agree with you again on that. Supersport's been unbelievable, the amount of sport that you can get in live sport. But at the end of the day, Naspers are very conflicted. As a media outlet, they're very involved with the ANC. Through Imtiaz Patel, they got caught up in government stuff. Through Nkondi Balfour, the previous sports minister before Fikile Mbalula, there was a lot of travels going on there. And what they did, they got the spokesperson guy called Graeme Abrams, who was the spokesperson for Nkondi Balfour and Fikile Mbalula. He's now one of the big boys at Supersport. So they managed to infiltrate government. They got involved with the Guptas through ANN7. We knew that Imtiaz Patel lied about all of that stuff. That got swept under the carpet. I'm sure you remember the whole thing with MultiChoice being caught up in that. They lied, they got caught out, and then they basically swept that under the carpet. And then, they've been involved with other stuff with the ANC. They are a supporter of the ANC when it comes to funding. And MultiChoice sponsors a lot of different entities to cover up their so-called, to show how good they really are. The South African National Editors Forum, sponsored by MultiChoice. That's a conflict for me, because what happens when you've got journalists that work for Supersport or MultiChoice that have got issues? So you got to be careful that there's a lot of gray areas. But at the end of the day, Imtiaz Patel is one of the dirtiest players in South African sport. And I'm talking about now the PSL TV rights that were awarded to Supersport quite a few years ago ahead of the SABC. That was scored from a very offside position. Imtiaz Patel basically knew what the tender was, and there was a so-called bribe of, I can't remember if it was 50 million or what it was, that was paid to Ivan Korza and a few other guys to make sure that Supersport got that tender. And these are things that are never, why are they not investigated? And even I talk about carte blanche openly. They're not as independent as everyone makes them out to be. It's not difficult to expose the second-hand used car salesman or a guy that doesn't fix your roof properly. Why haven't I gave them so much information 7-8 years ago, and it all came out now. It's all come out to be true. And George Mazarakis of Carte Blanche would say to me, we can't basically verify any of the stuff you're telling us. The Cheeky Watson EP Kings, the National Lottery. I can go on and on. Sazcock. This is all the stuff I gave them. It's all come out in the open now. 5-6 years too late. I had no backing. I had no support. And again, when I came back to the United States, when I had to flee for my safety 4 years ago, 3 independent producers from Carte Blanche wanted to come to the United States and do the story of me having to leave South Africa. And it was blocked by who? George Mazarakis. And now there's a dossier doing the rounds of the allegations of corruption at MultiChoice and Supersport, which is Naspers owned. Carte Blanche is Naspers owned. I'd love to see Carte Blanche do a story on Imtiaz Patel and the corruption, nepotism happening at Supersport. It's not going to happen. And the National Lottery, I mean, Carte Blanche does a story every now and again. I mean, every 6 to 8 months. Where's the follow-up? Where's the second story? Let's follow up. Let's go. Let's get these stories. The National Lottery has become a private banking account for a lot of ANC looters, and not just ANC, but a lot of other looters. And corruption in South Africa has no color, has no religion, has no ethnicity. It's widespread across the board. So many different people, and it's nonstop.
So when we talk about sports capture on this show, we talk about the National Democratic Revolution, and which is an underpinning of the ANC, which is essentially taking control of everything. And it sounds as if you're describing a situation in which sports has essentially been taken over by certain players, all are ultimately loyal to the biggest player, which is the government. They know who not to step on. Is that a fair description?
100%. So from the sports ministry to the Department of Sport and Recreation under Alec Moemi, who's a guy that no one ever grills. I mean, I would love a TV show. I mean, where I could, why is there no sports like a 60 minutes program on sport in South Africa? You guys should be doing it. You guys are, I mean, you guys get to the bottom of all this kind of stuff. But you would never get these guys on the show because these guys can't
induce
lie.
narcolepsy in Ramon, so there's also that danger.
Yeah, but I mean, these guys can't lie straight in bed. But from Fikile Mbalula to Alec Moemi to Imtiaz Patel to Ivan Korza to Danny Jordan, and then you talk about Sedgers, you talk about a company called Fly Africa, all these players that have got involved and give kickbacks. They pay for trips, they pay for housing, they pay for so much different stuff. And yet these guys are not exposed. And it's all because there's no culture of investigative sports journalism. They made an example of me, and it doesn't get exposed. And that's the sad part. But sport has been captured in South Africa. The Guptas were involved. The sports ministry is involved. The Department of National Sport and Recreation are involved. SASCOG are involved. And then all your sporting federations. I could probably name 5. I'll be lucky to name 5 clean sporting federations in South Africa. I think that's the true limit that we got. These guys they're in it for themselves. The best job in South Africa is to be a sports administrator, and your federation's corrupt, and you help yourself. What a job.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about Sedgers. I mean, I've heard about them. Obviously, they're the big joke of the last Olympics because we had Chad Leclos standing on the medal podium wearing everyone else is wearing Adidas and Nike and real brands. These are the world's sporting brands. This is what you want to dress in when you go across and represent your country because, well, they make good stuff. They spend a lot of money on R&D, and it looks good. But there's Chad Leclos standing in a tracksuit that looks Firstly, it looked like it was made out of parachute material from the 1990s. And the second thing was, it looked like, he got to the basket last and there was only a triple XL left. And so that's what he ended up having to wear. And it was embarrassing. And so was it embarrassing for most of our athletes. Fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't medal that much, so we didn't see them on podiums that often. But when we did, or when they were, warming up or whatever it is, it was embarrassing. Everyone else is there in sort of these tailored uniforms. You look at a team like Jamaica who comes, and I think they're Nike sponsored. They look incredible, and we look like a joke. Why the hell are we going with a company called Sedgars? Who the hell are they?
The kickbacks. So they started as a small clothing factory in Vereeniging, and they infiltrated the system through, whether it be Sam Ramsamy or Tubby Reddy, the former CEO. It's all involved in kickbacks, and their kickbacks have gone as far as Mark Alexander at South African Rugby. When Mega Pro, who are another dirty player in the market, when they got renewed the commercial contract rights with SA Rugby, Mark Alexander basically pushed it through and was promised a 2 million kickback, which went via Sedgars. Sedgars are a conduit. I know I've met even clients of theirs or suppliers of theirs that actually get paid in shoeboxes, cash in shoeboxes. It's a scary entity. They went from a clothing supplier to an SA sports equipment supplier. They don't even have some of the equipment, but the federations have to buy from them. So they got all these extra tariffs on top of that. You're paying top dollar. I'll give you an example. South African table tennis under a very corrupt lady by the name of Hajira Kaji, who was vice president of SASCOG. She was in charge. I think she was vice president of SA Table Tennis. A company offered them like 30 free table tennis tables. What do? They don't accept it. They go and buy from Sedgars at a top price. And Sedgars have now become this huge entity. They're now involved in the municipality of Vereeniging with roads, toilets, classrooms. They're involved with Ace Magashule in the Free State, and they've now become this huge, and no one can stop them. No one can stop them. Hopefully they will be stopped eventually, because they have become so corrupt. And it's all about kickbacks. It's paying for Fikile Mbalula's Dubai trips. It's giving Mark Alexander 2 million, acting as a conduit. It's crazy. But they are, and they come back to the tracksuits. They've been a supplier of SASCOG for I don't know how many years. There are reports that Hajira Kaji is a family link. There's a family link to Sedgars, and there's no tender. There's no tender for it. So give it to Sedgars. And that whole joke with the last Olympics was they had got another company from China to supposedly supply the tracksuits, but then they said that they never arrived in time. So Sedgars have got the label inside their tracksuits. Sedgars had the contract from day one. There was no need to go to China or anything else like that. And it has been proven that they do supply goods at a high rate, higher than anybody else, but they get all the contracts. And even with cricket balls and supplying to Cricket South Africa, who's their rep but Gerald Majola, a guy that was kicked out of South African cricket on grounds of corruption and maladministration, and he's the rep for Sedgars, getting all the cricket balls and equipment and most of the South African sporting federations, at least most of the big ones, Sedgars is a supplier.
So, this is very much like the Bosasa of sport, essentially, because a lot of people, what's interesting, Graeme, and this is the crux of this podcast for me, is that you have News 24 and Carte Blanche and a lot of these media houses talking about state capture endlessly. Like, we know the Gupta's, dietary requirements at weddings. We know their bowel movements by now. We know Gavin Watson's bloody, I don't know what, or how much his car is worth. Like, we know everything about the Guptas, Gavin Watson, Bosasa, all of those people. But there's hardly anything about Sedgars. Sedgars comes up when there's a public protector report that comes out, and Barry Bateman speaks about Sedgars quite a lot on EWN. He broke the story a while ago about Fikile Mbalula's trip. So the problem we have here is essentially a very monopolistic media company, Naspers, who is responsible for quite a lot of the news in the country and investigation in the country, who are beholden to the ANC through Supersport, who do all the sports, and to get the rights of Supersport, they make deals with nefarious federations. But these federations have to use Sedgars through whatever contracts they have to sign to get equipment. So you're never actually going to get a story about sectors or sports corruption generally, because basically the media is not independent, if we're really honest.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm trying to figure out, not one journalist has really offered to do a review of my book. And yes, I'm not asking for favors. I talk about the conflicted media in my book, so I can't expect people to review my book. But at the same time, if it was a free and independent media, it would happen. People would be talking about my book. We need to expose this. I fed so much information to Adrian Besson, Peter Louis Meyerberg, all these guys for years, for 7, 8 years. And I'm going to be interested now, because there's a huge dossier of allegations against Supersport and MultiChoice that has been given to about 5 or 6 journalists. Let's see how. And what I just feel that there's some of these media houses that MultiChoice have somehow infiltrated, whether it be through sponsorship, whether it be through connections, or what it is. But the time has come for South African sport for these guys for there to be justice. Grassroots development is suffering. Athletes are suffering. We could have so many more great athletes at these Olympic Games and these sporting events, but there's not a fair path, and there's no equal opportunity. And it's all because of greed and corruption and betrayal. And that's what it's all about. And I wish there were more sports journalists that would just get up on their feet and actually tell what's really happening. But instead, life's too good. When you're being winded down by federations, you're being flown to different trips, you're good friends with the president, you're good friends with the CEO. Even the DA was a big disappointment for me. I fed the DA, the sports ministers at the DA, I don't know how much information. And the biggest problem is the DA is conflicted because they've got a guy called Kobus Murray, who's one of their guys, a DA guy. I don't know what, he's a parliamentarian. He sits at the head of the SASCOG Finance Committee. He knows about all the corruption, but he goes on all these junkets. I've caught him out in so many different lies. And if we just go now and say to SASCOG, we want a spreadsheet of how your 900 million from the lottery's been spent over the years, let's have a look. And there goes all your corruption right out the window, because that's what it's all about. It's about these guys that are just there's no accountability, there's no exposure to these guys, and there's too many conflict of interest from political parties, from media, and then you got these marketing companies. You got so many people involved in South African sports capture.
We started off the show talking about the Proteas a bit flippantly, because of course Ramon is not a big sports fan, but I am a big sports fan, and I've become less so, because the problem is what many sports fans don't realize is that the losses that we keep having and the decay of our teams. I mean, let's think about this. If by 1997 we were the top rugby team in the world, we were, I think, top 30 in soccer. We were 1 or 2 in cricket. It was us and Oz, and there were other areas as well we did very well in. In fact, I don't know how many people know this, but we actually sold our ATP spot. We used to have the Johannesburg Open. We were actually quite a destination for tennis, and that helped to develop a lot of our stars. Wayne Ferreira, for example, actually originally came up through the ranks there. And we don't have an international tournament anymore for tennis. I think the only area I can see where we've actually developed in some sort of positive light in the last sort of 20 years in sports is probably golf, but that's a very individual sport. And I think it's also quite popular amongst politicians, so they like having tournaments here. And you've got people like Gary Player, who has driven a lot of that as well. But for the most part, our sport has slowly collapsed, and it seems that this is all around a background of corruption. We've gone from having a really strong soccer team to having a pretty weak soccer team who seem like they don't care every time they get on the pitch. I don't know what you've got to say about the 2010 World Cup, but there were so many lies sold at that World Cup that now 10 years later we can see were, if you didn't believe they were lies then, you certainly can see that they were now. We've got our rugby team, which has basically just continued to decline since their last victory at the World Cup in 2007. The Proteas, who frankly I stopped caring that much. I watch the games, but when I have time, but I'm not passionate about them anymore because I think they threw away the last World Cup through political interference. So really, if you've been paying attention, political interference in sport and obviously the corruption you're talking about seems to have collapsed almost all of our sporting ability and all of our sporting codes.
And Jonathan, I don't want to say I told you so. I didn't tell you guys because I didn't know you guys at all. But I mean, that's what I was reporting on that. In 2012, I was warning of the collapse of South African sport. And it doesn't matter what it was. It was rugby, it was soccer, it was cricket. The cancer had already got in. The systemic corruption was already totally evident. And what happens is you have this system where you have this maladministration, you have this corruption. You're not getting your best 11 players are not getting onto the field, whether it be through political interference, whether it be selection, whether it be wealth, whether it be whatever it is. You have massive nepotism in South African rugby. Give you an example. Yuri Roo's big mates are the coaches, of coaches of academies, coaches of the box under 20 side or the under 19 team, whatever it is. And that's what happens. And if you think about South African soccer, how many coaches have we had in the last 10 years? It's like 7 or 8. How much money? Millions and millions have been paid out to get these guys out of their contract. That money should have gone to grassroots development. But what happens is you have these coaches. South African sport administrators, these guys, they want yes people. They don't want people that are going to challenge the system. They don't want the best coaches. They don't want the best doctors. They don't want the best physios. They want people that are just going to be yes people, people that are going to turn a blind eye to all this corruption, sexual harassment, whatever it is in the sports workplace. And it is an end result of what you're going to see on the field. Border cricket, give you an example. I've got maybe 50 million from the national lottery over the last 4 years. The limit supposedly for a federation was 2 million. They've got 50 million over 4 years. Do you think I could get an answer what that money was spent on? I've sent 8, 10 emails to border cricket, to 4 different people. That money has been squandered. Border cricket's a ghost. It's laughable. But had that 50 million been spent on putting in nets in townships, putting pictures, putting an academy, and putting a real structured grassroots development program, you would have had kids coming through the border system coming into South African cricket. And instead, you want to put quotas. Quotas are a result of lazy administration and no grassroots development structures. And that's the burning point. And hence, you have now all these overage players playing at the Cricket World Cup. You don't have your best 11 players. You've got Kolpak. A lot of the players have left the country. Schoolboy cricketers have given up. You've got quotas at high school team representative levels where there's only allowed to be maybe 5 white kids in the team. Great, good, talented kids have all given up. How do you explain to a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, I can't select you you're not selected for this team because you're the wrong skin color? It's happening in swimming. It's happening in athletics. Your best athletes are not representing South Africa, and it's because there hasn't been proper grassroots development. There hasn't been transformation, and it's a sad state of affairs. And it's all about the administrators putting themselves first.
I might add that the other thing quoted, sorry, Ramon, is that you may get your representation in terms of your demographic that you want in the team, but all that ends up being is a black kid who went to St. Stithians. So you're not cool. You have a black dude in the team, but at the end of the day, that's not helpful, because if you're trying to help kids that didn't have opportunity, it's not the black kid who went to Saints or St. John's or Cares or Grays or any of those colleges. And that's who we're getting into our teams. And that's great. It's not to say that there aren't talented people. In this case, I'm referring to Kagiso Rabada, who's an incredibly talented bowler and one of the best in the world. In fact, I think if he continues the way he's going, he will go down as one of the all-time greats. But the point is that we should be trying to get kids who also are coming through disadvantaged backgrounds, and that's the whole point of the quota thing. And it's not working because, social engineering doesn't work.
And that's been my point for so long as well. When you think about, if you want a role model, if you want to become a cricket player or a soccer, you're a young kid growing up in a township in South Africa. You first of all can't afford Supersport. That's for one. And most of the big events are all on Supersport because the SABC is in such a mess. And then you got to take sport to the disadvantaged areas. How about an empty rugby stadium or empty soccer stadium? Why aren't you busing in these kids? Why isn't SAFA and SARU busing in kids from townships and giving them a day to remember? Watching your national team and at the same time feeding them, giving them a day to remember. That's what should be happening. Start thinking out of the box and doing something for the population that's out there. An incredible population. And again, I'll say it, for what we have in talent, finance, facilities, and resources, we should be getting 25 to 30 medals at the Olympic Games. It's not happening. And it's not going to happen under the current administrations.
Yeah, well, I think there's a big joke that, whenever we go to a World Cup in cricket or rugby or whatever, like half the opposition team is South African. I think like the Scottish rugby teams like has 4 South Africans, and the British cricket team has like 6, and Australia has a few as well. So I mean, yeah, so people are leaving to go join other teams that really care about merit more than race or quotas or things like that. But Graeme, I mean, here's the essential thing though. Someone like Robert Marawa, who you rate very highly. I know of the man, of course, because I've he's been around since I was a child, and from what I've seen, he's done a good job everywhere where he's been. But you say that he actually was let go because he wanted to expose sexual harassment at Supersport. Do you have any sort of? And I don't want to pick on Robert because I don't want to actually cause more consternation for him because I don't know what his goals are going forward. But if Robert is the man to be trusted, I mean, what would cause Supersport to let go of probably the greatest, sport presenter this country has?
Again, it's all about talent. You've got this great talent that's been let go because the people at the top that are corrupt. There's a big thing happening at Supersport where they've got these entities now that are run by. They've set up these BEE companies within Supersport that are getting a lot of work, and it's being filtered into a guy called Alvin Naika, and Imtiaz Patel's got the backing of this. It's a nice little colluded little system that they got going there. And what Robert wanted to do, and I've heard this I actually didn't hear this from Robert. I've actually got 3 or 4 really good inside sources. And Robert was standing up for sexual harassment in the workplace. There was a couple of producers that had been sexually harassing women and stuff like that. And Robert was putting up a fight and said, guys, either you're going to do something about it or we need to expose this. And plus, he was a big supporter of mine. He retweets a lot of my stuff on corruption and stuff like that. And that was getting to Imtiaz Patel. And Imtiaz Patel is the one that pushed the button. He did it with Barry Richards. I don't know if you remember when Barry Richards was fired as a cricket commentator from Supersport. That was Imtiaz Patel's doing. And he got someone else to go. He got a guy called Tex Zera at the time to go tell Barry Richards he's fired. He did the same now. He got someone to come and tell. He got the CEO of Supersport to tell Robert Marawa, we're not renewing your contract. And Robert said there was a few other things involved as well. It wasn't just the sexual harassment. It wasn't his support of trying to expose corruption and stuff like that. There were a couple other things as well. But at the end of the day, it's not about talent. It's if you feel threatened, if you feel like your corruption and everything else that you've been doing is going to be exposed, you're going to get rid of that person. You're not going to keep them. Good people, really good people from Mnet, MultiChoice, and Supersport have been let go because of the so-called mafia, if you like to put it like that.
Right. So I mean, let's use Imtiaz Patel as an example here. So from what I understand, the notes you said to me, he was chosen by Koos Becker of Naspers to come into MultiChoice and actually sort of ingratiate himself with the ANC. Maybe he was a sort of a member of the ANC beforehand and had a bit of influence. So these sort of people come into a private organization like Naspers or Supersport in this case, and then they create their own little fiefdom within it, essentially, because they are very important in power and influence to the board of Naspers. And then when they are in the actual corporation or the company, they ingratiate themselves by they become the BEE partner, essentially. And essentially you got BEE and your BEE partner, you basically have a blank slate to do whatever the hell you want. So you create alternative businesses that feed the original corporation that hired you in the first place, and that is backed up by favors from the national government. So it's indicative of what BE is. It's an enrichment scheme for elites, and B, Supersport is just but one example of it. But from what I hear, according to my sources, Patel has actually done quite a lot for sports. So is there a bit of give and take here, or is it a case of he is all bad and there's really no need for him to be around?
Yeah, I mean, he's all bad. I mean, I'm going to be blatant with you. First of all, he's also pretty racist. He's also anti-Semitic. I mean, I've encountered it. I worked for Supersport for a little while. He used to walk around Supersport, and if you'll excuse my English, he'd go, "Why? There are too many effing white guys around here." And then I had an incident as well where he just basically said to me, "Well, you Jews know what to do." And I wish I recorded some of this stuff and there are people that'll vouch for me, that'll tell you that that's how he is. He's loud, and he's kind of this, he's an arrogant guy. Yes, Supersport, Russell McMillan was the guy that really got Supersport to where it started. Imtiaz Patel's just followed on. When you got money, it's easy to do stuff. He's an unsavory character who's very corrupt, and he's a puppet master for Koos Becker at Naspers. That's what he is. And the whole thing with the ANN7, he lied. There were kickbacks going on, and the PSL deal, he basically thought that Koos Becker would get rid of him if Supersport never got the PSL. And you remember, I mean, they paid ludicrous amounts for it. Unbelievable what they paid for it. But TV rights and mobile rights is the little gray area. Mobile rights. And it's big money. We're talking big money.
What do you mean by mobile rights? What are those?
That's the part. So when you do the PSL contract, basically, you also give mobile rights to whether it be Vodacom or MTN, to basically the games to screen them on mobile, and that goes around the world. So there's huge money involved in that. The exact little details of how it all works. But that supposedly is the gray area, how this 50 million, whatever, was paid over to Ivan Korza for Supersport to get the PSL TV rights. And they classified it as mobile rights.
Sure. Wow, that's it's quite a rabbit hole because there's a lot of players. I mean, there's a lot of names you've mentioned, a lot of people involved, and it's a rabbit hole and a web, and it's all over the show. It's nothing it kind of doesn't touch. What do you think is the chances of some sort of reversal here?
Jonathan, I'm not that I've given up hope, but when I've seen like the SASCOC Commission of Inquiry, and when I see what's happened with Zuma, and I'll believe it when there's actually some accountability and there's justice. When some of these guys face the answers, when the Guptas are extradited, or when things are happening, when Zuma goes to jail, or but right now you just have. You also have a public protector who seems to be playing the ball and not playing the man and not the ball. I don't know. The whole system is so corrupt. How do you change it? Yes, you can vote the DA into power. They've also got their skeletons. So I just don't know. And politicians are a different breed. They also look after themselves first before anybody else. And I'm scared to say that I just don't believe that there's a future for South African sportsmen and women to have a fair path as long as this continues. And it's a cancer. It's a deeply rooted cancer, and I'm just not sure that there's a cure.
Yeah, you hear that, listeners, from Trump's America. No hope for South Africa. And you got to really know things are bad.
I'm talking about South African sport.
No, I got you. You could be talking about South African everything, let me tell you. At the moment, things not looking great, setting new records for the Rand and amongst other things. Let's talk. I think we kind of get the point. South African sport is in a real problem area, pretty much. Corruption has infected everything. What about people who say, well, this is sports worldwide? You basically pay to have the FIFA World Cup in your country. They eventually got rid of Sepp Blatter, which didn't change anything. FIFA is possibly still the most corrupt organization on earth that earth has ever seen. In fact, the fact that countries pretty much sublet their entire citizenry to that organization for a period of a month. to 2 months when they pull in. That seems to happen. Doping in sport. We've got examples like Lance Armstrong, but I have a suspicion that it's far deeper than that in pretty much every code. People are going to say, well, this is how the game is played, Graeme. The Cricket World Cup's going on. Does anyone really believe those results? Sport is corrupt, and it's kind of, let's just enjoy it for what it can provide in a little bit of entertainment, and leave it at that.
So I want to touch on a couple points. Obviously, sports betting's changed the whole sporting world. I mean, there's so many illegal betting sites. There's so much corruption when it comes to sports betting. So that's one of the big issues as well. Yes, and you're right. Corruption in sport is worldwide. All the Russian stuff, it's a worldwide phenomenon. South Africa is not an orphan when it comes to corruption in sport. The point I'm trying to make here, for instance, the US Olympic Committee may be corrupt, but what they do is they look after the athletes. They put the athletes first. So I'll give you an example. Someone put it to me in layman's terms. He said the old apartheid government in South Africa would steal 25 cents of the dollar and put 75 cents back into the country. This government steals $1.25 of the dollar. So how can the country survive? And that's what I'm talking about sport. If these guys would not steal everything and steal so much, why can't they just give the athletes an opportunity? As a kid growing up, I had every sports opportunity to play as a kid. Played soccer, cricket, whatever it was. Why can you not give these kids dreams? Sport is the most incredible thing. It unifies the country. Can they not see that? Can they not see past their corruption? Give kids an opportunity, make it a fair path, get these kids out playing sport. It reduces your drug problem. It reduces problems in society. I used to play sport. I would go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning and not get home till 6 o'clock at night. What's happened to school sport? I mean, kids have to go get private lessons now. They have to play for clubs. It's too expensive for the majority. The money is there. It is being totally abused. And that's the problem that I have. And yes, it's a worldwide phenomenon, corruption in sport, but you can still make a difference, and sport can make a difference in so many people's lives. And that's what Mandela said. And unfortunately, this current government have destroyed his legacy, and they destroyed it fast. Yeah. So what I was saying is that because we had school sport every afternoon, I didn't want to miss it, and those were the opportunities. And right now in South Africa, school sport is, it just seems like so many more kids now have to go get private coaching. They've got to go join clubs because they're not getting enough at school. And keeping kids at school, instead of them coming home and playing video games, getting them out off the street. School sport is one of the most important things in any society. And it's been neglected in South Africa. There's so many schools now where the teachers, obviously because they're not paid enough to stay in the afternoons, but it's all about starting from the junior level, giving these kids an opportunity to play school sport. You're creating dreams. Sport is the biggest unifier in South Africa. Nelson Mandela said that. And sadly, this government have just destroyed his legacy, destroyed the great Nelson Mandela's legacy, and they destroyed it fast.
So, I mean, yes, I played a lot of sports, and I wasn't a druggie or anything like that, but I enjoyed myself while doing so. The problem is, Graeme, I think that the lack of sports development actually sort of increases inequality at the end of the day. I mean, if you've got money and you can have a private training and things like that, you'll obviously be better than someone who can't. So it actually increases inequality and increases the same sort of people who will be in a national sports team. I think there was I can't remember, if you're a Springbok or a Protea, you come from like 4 or 5 schools in South Africa, and that's it. You have a much greater chance. It was Gray's College and a few others I can't remember. But Graeme, the problem is, no one sort of, how can I put this? I'm trying to be polite about you. Maybe are you like a bit of a kook? Maybe like, do you see a conspiracy where there isn't any? We understand that there's state capture. We understand all these things. No one seems to sort of believe you. And I think I know what your answer will be about, the media is conflicted on this. But I mean, I hope your book probably has all the answers, so you can, be free to punt that while you add it. But you're the only person who's actually talking about this in this manner. And I'm not saying you're wrong or right, but why are you the only one everywhere?
And that's, sure. And I mean, I understand it. And people are going, so many journalists have said to me, oh, that the conspiracy theory, Graeme Joffe and his new conspiracy. And Graeme Joffe's got an axe to grind. I've absolutely no axe to grind. Zero axe to grind. I've no bitterness towards anything. Yes, I've bitterness to being chased out of the country, my country of birth, and I'm still a South African at heart. And yes, I'm bitter about that. But at the end of the day, as a journalist, you got your ethics and integrity. And when in 2012, I started getting information about, you guys will go, if we can just go back how I got started on this. Do you remember the big controversy between the Lions and the EP Kings in Super Rugby? About the one to kick the Lions out?
They kicked the Lions out.
Correct. So South African rugby failed. They had promised the EP Kings they would get into Super Rugby. They didn't set up a promotion relegation system, and suddenly it became a free-for-all in the media, while the Lions should be kicked out and while the EP Kings should be put in. And who was the leader of the media to put the EP Kings in Super Rugby was Mark Keohane. Mark Keohane then suddenly turns out to be Luke Watson's unaccredited agent. Sorry, didn't want to do anything about it. So suddenly I start digging. And then Mark Keohane starts to blackmail me on Twitter. Joffers, tell everyone why you left CNN. Better say something, otherwise the dossier is going to come out. So deflecting the attention, only to find out that the Mark Keohane's very involved with the EP Kings, very close to Cheeky Watson. And then he's also the spokesperson for the Olympic Committee of South Africa. And Highbury Safika Media are another big, dirty player in the market. And they have all these media contracts, including they had the media contract for the Olympic Committee of South Africa. So they were just, they became these big, they were, what's the word I'm looking at? They were these like, they were just creating their own little media haven. And Mark Keohane was a big part of that, became very close to Gideon Sam and Tubby Reddy at SASCOG. And that made me dig. And as soon as that started going, when that started going on Twitter, suddenly I had coaches, athletes, and administrators all confide in me, going, here's finally a guy in South African sport that's prepared to stand up for the truth and to tell people what's really going on. And some of the stories, I would have tears rolling down my eyes, how these athletes are being treated. And I loved it. Investigative journalism became a total addiction. I won't disagree with that. But everything out there is, everything's fact. And everything's starting to come true, and everything's starting to finally get in the public domain. But it's almost too little, too late. But I don't need vindication. I don't need anything. But I do. My career was taken away from me by a malicious lawsuit for 20 million by SASCOG. No one wanted to touch me. My career was pretty much ended, and I kept fighting. Why is there no culture of investigative sports journalism in South Africa? If I was in the UK, I'd be one of 100 journalists. Yes, I'm a lone crusader. No regrets. And I know, conspiracy Joffers. There are very few of those people now, because now what's coming out, people are realizing how sick South African sport really is. And sadly, yes, a lot of sports journalists, a lot of them turned on me. I had great friends in the sports media. When I was Joffers, my boy at Highveld, I was the first to get MC functions, doing a lot of charity functions for free. I loved it. Sport was my life. And I had every opportunity as a kid. And why should the kids in South Africa not have that same opportunity? And I'm all about, I love it. Journalism, you got your ethics and integrity. I know that I've got my ethics and integrity as a journalist. And the question I pose to other sports journalists in South Africa, have you got the same?
So my last point is journalism isn't what it used to be. There's really questionable ethics and integrity. I'm not convinced that journalism has a base set of ethics anymore. This past weekend, the New York Times falsely reported on someone who'd gone down a YouTube rabbit hole and become far right because of a whole bunch of far right people, except he never became far right. He actually ended up condemning the far right, becoming sort of center left, and as a result of a whole bunch of people who aren't anywhere close to the far right. But the New York Times doesn't care about that because they push an agenda. And, that's the newspaper of record, so to speak, pushing that specific agenda. And I think one of the reasons, for example, the Renegade Report has been so successful is because we tell a different side of the story, and we're willing to have a long format conversation about stuff, and people can listen and they might disagree with you and go, I don't believe anything he says, or I believe half of what he says, or whatever it is. But we're willing to have these conversations which aren't really driven by anything other than having a conversation. And
right. And
Ramon?
sorry, Jonathan. And let's not forget that we sort of don't get funded by anyone, despite our best intentions. People have come up to us and emailed us, say, we would like to do this. We'd like to fund you or sponsor you. Said, cool. You are allowed a 30-second slot, but we're not going to change the content. You're not going to tell us who to bring on. You're not going to tell us anything like that. And then, there's no reply to emails like that. So, we are fiercely independent and poor, but it's quite nice to be independent.
So the point is journalism? My question to you: you've been involved in journalism, sure, sports journalism, but it's journalism. Do you not think journalism in itself is kind of in a death rattle?
And so many people think they're journalists. I mean, you just post something on Twitter, you're a journalist. You post something on Facebook, you're a journalist. And I actually salute you guys. I must be honest with you. I didn't know much about the Renegade Report until you guys got in contact with me, when Ramon got in touch, and then I started looking up about some stuff. And I salute you guys, because that was me. Fearless, independent, and poor. That was me. But no regrets. I love the industry, and I'm burning desire to get back into it. Teaching tennis and caddying, what I'm doing now, yes, I enjoy it, but it's my career is journalism. So I'm burning desire to get back in. I've been doing some lectures around the United States. I went to Ithaca College in New York, big journalism school. And those kids, their eyes were like flying saucers. I love sharing the story. And the dangers are that you get involved as a whistleblower, investigative journalism. It's a very lonely path. I had a very lonely path. My life got turned upside down for 7 years. The old Joffe's my boy, happy-go-lucky, was far from happy. But again, no regrets, because you have a chance to make a difference, and you want to keep your ethics and integrity. And sadly, there are a lot of sports journalists that are on the payroll, as I said, wined and dined, getting free trips. They're matey. I mean, Mark Keohane goes to Rassie Erasmus Bryce. So do you think he's ever going to criticize Rassie for what he's doing in SA Rugby? And Rassie's got the golden. I mean, we see what's going on in SA Rugby. It's just incredible what Yuri Rue and Mark Alexander have created there. It's almost laughable. It's a mini FIFA.
Yeah, quite. And I'm afraid it will continue for the foreseeable future, I'm afraid, Graeme. But last thing from me, on your side, what are you hoping to do? First of all, just tell me your book. Is it available in South Africa, where it's available? And most importantly, what do you think, or what do you hope will happen once, it gets read by people here?
So I self-published on Amazon, because I was a bit nervous about sending the book back to South Africa, because there's a lot of conflict of interest there as well. But it's now been picked up by just some great people from Gecko Distribution, and then the launch is going to be the 27th of June at Scoobs in Monte Cassino. And I mean, I would love you guys to be there, and it would be I think it's going to create a huge stir. Amazon, unfortunately, wasn't really accessible to a lot of South Africans with the mailing costs. It was too expensive. And I'm not, believe you me, the last thing I want, I'm not trying to become rich from a book. I just want South Africans to know the truth. And I know from people when they read it, so far the people that have got it are stunned, because a lot of the stuff they haven't read about. Yes, I repeat some of the columns that I wrote in News 24 just to set up the picture of how I got sued and how then I became this lone crusader, where I made so many enemies. I lost friends. Over it. But there's so many corrupt conduits, and the whole South African sports capture is a real thing. It's a real thing, but people don't want to believe it, because it's our entertainment. Watching soccer, watching cricket, you know how the mood of the country changes when Bafana win, or the Proteas win, when they win, and when SA Rugby win. When those guys win and we break world records in athletics or swimming, that's when the country is at its best. It's going to become less and less.
Well, don't worry. Only Bernie Sanders becomes rich off a book, so nothing to worry about there. You should only be so lucky to be able to afford 3 houses and an Audi R8.
And Crooked Hillary, don't forget about her.
Let's make South Africa great again.
South African sports. All right. Well, Graeme, thank you. I really appreciate you joining us. I was just thinking it's humorous. We've had Jeremy on the show. We've had you. I just need to get Sam on, and then we've it's the trifecta of my morning drive to school.
And when you get Sam on, do me a favor, because Lance Armstrong, when I was watching him, and I'm not a big cycling fan, and I'm going, this guy's doping. I mean, this was before he got busted. I said, Sam, the guys that are coming second, third, and fourth have been caught doping. Lance Armstrong gets up a bike. He rides 200 miles up in the Pyrenees, and he gets off the bike, and he hasn't raised a sweat. I said, there's something not right. The best pharmacy wins the Tour de France. She used to go crazy with me. She loved Lance Armstrong. She said, what are you talking about? You have no facts. You have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, Sam. And then when he finally did get caught, I go, Sam. But it's just, so ask about Lance Armstrong. Till I send my love and ask about Lance Armstrong.
All right, we'll do. Well, thanks as always. We can find you on Twitter at Joffe is my boy.
Jonathan, that's where I'm at, and still poking the bear. And again, guys, thank you for your time. Thank you. This has been, for me, it's actually, I let stuff off my chest when I talk about this. I'm so passionate about South African sport. Yes, I've lost the bit of patriotism when it comes to the teams, because when the teams win, it papers over the cracks. So when the teams lose, there's more opportunity to dig and stuff like that for people to really know what's going on. And that's all I want. The truth needs to come out. There needs to be justice, and there needs to be, number one, a fairer path and equal opportunity for South Africa's sportsmen and women.
Cool. I don't think we can disagree with that. As always, you can find us at renegade_report on Twitter, on Facebook, both the page and the group. Please do join us if you like what you hear. Every week, we're available to you for free of charge, but we do ask if you've got a little bit of cash lying around at renegadereport.co.za. There, I eventually got that out, /donate. We'd love you to support the show so that we can continue bringing you guests like Graeme and others. And as always, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.